Cable is Nathan Christopher Charles Summers. Most of us just call him Cable. Cable as a baby was kidnapped by Apocalypse and infected with the techno-organic virus. This is the only thing that makes him, I guess, kinda weak, but really he's honestly still amazingly strong, as he can even fend off the techno-organic virus, something that most people can't even do at all, containing it to one side of his body using his psionic powers. That in and of itself is pretty impressive, as like I said, the techno-organic virus is generally known for being unstoppable and usually pretty fast acting. Even with his psionic powers mainly preoccupied as well, Cable is still a hard one to best, as he has so many combatant-based skills that he brings to the table, and he is an experienced time traveler besides. What do you feel is the most powerful power set that X-Men, mutants, non-mutants can have? Any heroes or villains? Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, and while you might not think of Magneto as being an X-Man, considering, he did start out as an X-Men villain, he has also worked with the team before and even served as a member. A lot of people that have now watched X-Men 97 are learning all about this side of Magneto, this time in Magneto's life when he actually worked with the X-Men. At one point he was even in charge of a whole New Mutants crew. Let's not forget that. Magneto may have some questionable methods when it comes to getting justice, but I honestly think at the end of the day, he's just trying to do what's best for mutants. Or at least he's trying to do what he thinks is best for mutant kind in the way that he thinks it should be done. Polaris, like her father, also has magnetic-based powers, which, like her father, are also pretty impressive. Polaris is considered an alpha level mutant, but I do think she also shows a lot of potential for being Omega, and she joined the X-Men team following the Krakoan X-Men elections for the team's roster. Shogo is the adopted son of Jubilee. While he's believed to be a human currently in the comics, also not being Jubilee's biological son, but also it's a little bit early because, mutant powers usually manifest in your teens, he has actually exhibited powers before. Yeah, and he's just still a little kid. Namely, he has had the ability to turn into a freaking dragon. This, however, was a power that was reserved for Otherworld alone. During the Excalibur series from the Krakoan era, Jubilee joined up with the Excalibur team, and she and Shogo ended up in Otherworld. Shogo's imagination, combined with fairy magic, allows him to turn into a dragon while there. However, as I said, because these powers were brought on by that shift in location, Shogo himself only has this ability while he's in Otherworld, so it's limited, And it's also, I don't think it's controllable, I think it just happens. Controversial take, especially because he is a child of two villains, but I wanted to include Graydon Creed on here because I do feel he's underrated and he is powerful in his own way, at least in terms of how dangerous he can be in the comics. Graydon Creed is not a mutant himself and is not a hero, but like his parents, he is of course more of a villain. But a villain who actually hates mutants, whereas, especially with Mystique, I feel like she's trying to be a villain to help mutants. He was strong from a young age, managing to find a way to survive at the age of 12 after his mother left him, coming to terms with the fact that Graydon would likely never manifest mutant powers and had instead been born, well, basically normal. Even though he's a villain, I feel kind of bad for Graydon Creed just based on how his life started out. It's pretty rough. He is the son of Mystique and Victor Creed. He is strong in terms of his influence and his refusal to stay dead. Graydon has been resurrected multiple times, and he also recently gained cybernetic enhancements that made him more physically strong as well. Olivier Raven is legally known as Olivier Lebeau and is one of the alternate reality children of Gambit and Rogue. Honestly, I feel like there are not enough of these kids out in the multiverse. For a couple as famous as Gambit and Rogue, you would normally think that we'd have, a ton of multiversal kids from them, just like across the multiverse. So many kids. Admittedly, I'm not quite sure though that Rogue and Gambit are really the breeding type, so maybe that's why that doesn't exist, but still, they're super popular, so yeah, you would just think it would be, and yet it is not. They seem pretty content right now just having their fur babies in the main continuity, but I digress. There is a reality where they do have kids. Olivier hails from the reality of Earth 41001, the reality of Gen Next, a group Olivier is a part of. He has powers similar to his mother's, except that he has better control over them and is able to choose when and how much power, life energy, and memories he absorbs via contact or doesn't absorb in cases where, he just wants to make physical contact without using his powers. Something that now Rogue can do, but it took her a long time to be able to do that. He can also absorb powers on a more permanent level, although he has less control, it seems, over when that happens. Like his father, he also seems to have some charm-based powers as well, which not many people know, but Gambit does have some of that sometimes depending on who's writing him. Chimera is the daughter of Storm and likely Black Panther, who hails from the alternate reality of 13729. Yeah, sadly Storm and T'Challa have never actually had a child together in the main continuity. I know, it's tragic. Unless they had a real secret one that, you know, we don't know about yet. You never know. You never know. Something like that could always be happening. Chimera seems to have inherited the powers of her mother, but also shares a connection to the Earth, which allows her to draw on and harness its energy. She's also a skilled tracker and can communicate telepathically with animals. Pretty cool. I'd also assume, as you know, she is the daughter of Storm, that she is a skilled combatant as well. As while Storm is more well known for her goddess status and weather manipulation powers, she's also actually an extremely skilled fighter as well. Charles Xavier II is the son of Charles Xavier and Mystique, if you can believe that. I know, it's pretty shocking, but it is a thing. Charles Xavier II was technically born into the reality of Earth 616, where we later find out that while Mystique took the form of Moira when giving birth, Charles actually knew that, you know, he was in a relationship with Raven. She just chose that form while giving birth, so unlike many other instances with Mystique, she wasn't actually manipulating her partner here. Charles Xavier II, though, when we usually come to know him, and he's not just a little baby that we saw once, is all grown up, and is known as being from the alternate future of Earth 13729. When his powers first manifested, he accidentally killed his adoptive mother and ended up later joining forces with his half-brother Reyes, another child of Mystique's sired by Wolverine. Charles Xavier II has a brilliant and conniving mind, and like his father is an immensely gifted telepath, capable of using his powers to bend others to his will. Ruby Summers is one of the Summers kids who I do not think gets enough love in the comics, which is why I'm very happy to be talking about her here. She is from the home reality that is shared with Bishop, that's the alternate future known as Earth 1191. Here she is the daughter of Scott Summers and Emma Frost. She is known for being one of the leaders of the Summers Rebellion, having been inspired to carry on Professor X's and the X-Men's dream and continue the fight for freedom and acceptance of mutant kind, inspired to do so by Layla Miller. Her powers are a combo of her dad's, Scott's, and her mom's, Emma's. Instead of a diamond form, she actually has a ruby quartz form and can also fire optic blasts from her eyes. Like Emma, while in her ruby form, Ruby is almost indestructible. She does not need to eat or drink when she's in her ruby form, and she also does not age either. This is also how Ruby appears to be so young, despite actually being pretty old. Proteus is the son of Moira McTaggart, who before turning into a villain, I would have actually counted more as an X-Men ally, if not a full-blown member at times. Proteus is Kevin McTaggart, son of Joseph and Moira McTaggart. He was one of the members of the super important team on Krakoa known as the Five. The Five is basically a team that was brought together and had their powers utilized in tandem to resurrect fallen and lost mutants. His powers as part of that team are mainly used to warp reality, allowing the non-viable eggs that Egg produces to become viable for life. Proteus is considered to be an Omega level mutant that requires hosts to survive. Initially, Kevin had a body, but of course now he's just pure energy because he does burn through those bodies, making him not just a powerful psionic, but also honestly a deadly energy vampire as well. Legion is the son of Professor Charles Xavier that was conceived when he had a love affair with Gabrielle Haller, which is where Legion gets his legal last name, as his given name is David Haller. Legion is so powerful because he suffers from severe dissociative identity disorder, where he has more than 100 personas residing within him. Each persona, though, has a number, many have names, and guess what? They each have their own specific power set that show up whenever they take over Legion. Because of this, Legion can do almost anything. His powers seem pretty limitless. He can manipulate matter and time. We've seen him literally time travel and completely warp reality as a result of his vast and diverse abilities and personas. He also has some pretty powerful hair, which I'm happy to say he is still rocking even now in the modern day. Honestly, looking really good and really weird, Legion.
Let's kick it off with a big bang, or something that may have predated the Big Bang, the Phoenix Force. There really isn't a question about how strong the Phoenix Force is. It is one of the most powerful beings in the universe, the Marvel universe at least. It has unlimited power, and it's not just a high-level threat, it's been deemed an extinction-level threat. No one really knows how it works, which I think works in its favor. If you don't know how the thing works, you don't know how to defeat it probably. The Phoenix Force has warped reality on a universal scale before, which is not an easy feat. The X-Men are definitely grateful the Force has taken to Jean Grey, because otherwise a fight against it would be near impossible to win. Not to say they haven't fought it, they have, they just usually are fighting the Force when it is attached to Jean, so she can help like from the inside. The Phoenix Force in its usual state is neither good nor bad. It's when it became the Dark Phoenix that panic set in. Dark Phoenix was a villain, evil, craved destruction, it wasn't cute. Sabretooth is a toothache, persistent, annoying, and has the potential to be a bigger problem than you think. Victor Creed has been around forever. Not really, he was born in the 19th century, but with all the problems he has caused, it feels longer. Mainly, Sabretooth is focused on hurting Wolverine, but he does not discriminate, he will attack anybody. Sabretooth is very similar to Wolverine, some argue even stronger. One classifies him as a severe threat, I agree. He has an incredibly powerful healing factor and superhuman senses, claws are on each of his fingers and toes, and he has fangs. Pretty standard stuff when it comes to mutants honestly, but he becomes way more threatening when you take his life experience into account. He spent a lot of time over his long life training, working with multiple organizations including Hydra, the CIA, and Weapon X. He learned to fight, to track and hunt, to shoot accurately, manipulate and gaslight like it's an Olympic sport, and just overall sharpen his intellect. He was adamantiumed twice, the first time by Apocalypse and then the second by Weapon X. In a surprising turn of events, Professor X and Magneto accidentally created a merged persona. His name is Onslaught and he is the worst. Onslaught was created after Magneto ripped the adamantium off Wolverine's bones and Professor X kind of lost it and made Magneto catatonic. Turns out when that happened, Professor X absorbed Magneto's emotions and then those merged with the darkness inside Professor X that he'd kept hidden away, and boom, we have Onslaught. Onslaught stayed hidden away for a long time. It was when Professor X's astral body was brought to the physical plane by Nate Gray that he was freed. Onslaught took over Professor X and attempted to get the X-Men to try and work against humanity. The X-Men were like, absolutely not. Onslaught got upset and started absorbing mutants and other powerful beings. It took the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers to destroy Onslaught. It makes sense considering he had the powers of Magneto and Professor X in one body. Nathaniel Essex has gone by many names and clones, but no matter which version is out there, he is a nuisance. Originally, he was a low-level threat, just a human scientist, but then he was genetically modified by Apocalypse. That's when he became Mr. Sinister. He was really focused on machines and accurately predicted that they would someday take over the world, so to combat this, he had the genius idea to create his own AI that would be better than all the other AIs. What could go wrong? Nathaniel wanted to become a Dominion, and that is the highest level of interstellar intelligence. Dominions exist outside of space and time, and they're basically gods. They are so strong that very few things are considered threats to them, the Phoenix Force being one actually. On Nathaniel's journey to reach this status, he created 3 clones of himself and 1 clone of his wife. One continued with Mr. Sinister, one would become Dr. Stasis, his third would be Orbis Stellaris, and his wife's would be Mother Righteous. Each clone had a purpose to investigate so that the necessary info could be gathered to turn Nathaniel into a Dominion. Each of these clones caused problems for the X-Men at some point too. Eventually Nathaniel did reach his goal and took on the title Enigma. Enigma has been kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes for a long time since it exists outside of space and time. For the most part, Enigma doesn't bother the X-Men too much, it's his clones that cause the most trouble. The Nimrod, that is Nimrod, caused quite a stir at the 3rd Hellfire Gala, left such a lasting impression that I had to include it. Nimrod is a type of Sentinel, so there are multiple Nimrods out there. There was one in Days of Future Past, but this one right now is the one that attacked the Hellfire Gala. The head of Orchis, at the time of its creation, created this Nimrod from a place of grief after losing her husband. She placed her husband's consciousness into the robot's head, but then it got erased after an attack on the Orchis facility. Now this very powerful robot has no humanity in it, and it vows to put an end to mutants. So the robot is a bit messed up. The robot worked with an Omega Sentinel to trap and off Professor X. Then the robot worked with Orchis, the organization, which we will talk about in a second. That's when the Hellfire Gala was attacked. This was a brutal attack on mutants, Iceman, many new X-Men members, and Juggernaut did not make it out. This robot was created to protect humanity from mutants, but Nimrod went a little haywire and started wiping out humanity instead. But Nimrod came from somewhere, and that was Orchis. Orchis is an organization created to preserve humans, designed to prevent mutant ascendancy over humanity. It turns out mutants were appearing at an alarming rate to those people and were set to surpass the human population sooner rather than later. Orchis is extreme. They caused the biggest drop in population for mutants since M-Day, and that was the attack on the Hellfire Gala mentioned in the Nimrod point. When that attack took place, around the world and at the gala, about 250,000 mutants were taken out. That is a strong and organized organization if I've ever read one. To top it off, they also messed with Krakoa's main export that had the world accepting the island in the first place. The export was like the fauna of the island. It had healing properties and was used in lots of human medicines. Orcus messed with it and made it so that any human that ingested the tampered export would pass away. This was revealed to the world with the message that for every mutant on Earth, a human would be harmed for it. So now the remaining mutants couldn't stay on Earth anymore or had to go into hiding. Thankfully, the remaining mutants were able to regroup and strike back, defeating the organization before all the life on Earth could be wiped out. Apocalypse has faced off against the X-Men, each time more harrowing than the last. He is pretty extreme in his thinking, believing very strongly in a survival of the fittest philosophy, which makes sense. He is the first of the second generation of mutant kind, so he is the fittest, and his life has just been one surviving horror after another. That doesn't excuse his behavior though. Apocalypse does have a job. He was employed by the Celestials to ensure evolution takes its natural course. With the job came some perks like getting enhanced with Celestial tech, making his already powerful form even more of a threat, even godlike. He would go into periods of hibernation so he could rest and then technically live longer. When he woke up in the modern age, his first order of business was to cause a major conflict between mutants and humans. Nap time is over, it is go time now. One thing about Apocalypse is that he is always moving forward, always literally evolving into the best, most powerful version of himself. He can't stay dead, but he can be taken out of the picture for a while, but unfortunately, he will always come back. A quick list of some of the things Apocalypse is capable of: matter manipulation, self-atomic manipulation, telepathy, flight, telekinesis, and various celestial energy manipulation like teleportation, for example. If you thought Apocalypse was bad, wait till you meet his wife. Genesis is an Omega level mutant capable of beating Annihilation in god form in one-on-one combat. She mentally controls the plants in her general vicinity, that's her main deal, including the flora that might be inside you, kinda. Vegans better watch out. Genesis doesn't necessarily control the plant life in you to make you do whatever she wants, though I'm sure that's probably the next step for her. What she uses the flora for is to spy on you and even track you. She is one of the characters that spends a lot of time wearing the Annihilation helm. Her and her husband were the rulers of Akara, their children, the four horsemen of the Apocalypse. Genesis is very skilled in combat and the process of war because she is a millennia old and has been fighting a war for most of her life. The one between Amenth demons and the mutants of her world, and that the X-Men eventually did get involved in too. I guess you could say she started out good, she was just fighting for her people after all, but when she defeated Annihilation and then had to take on his helm, she got corrupted, and that's when her true villain era started. That's when she started conquering places and starting new wars. She was only defeated when the golden helm was knocked from her head. So I've done all this yapping about Annihilation and his helm, but I have not yapped too much about him, so who is he? Annihilation is a dark god residing in the darker world known as Amenth. He rules demons. He is kind of like the Satan of his world. He is very old, he is so old, he has myths and legends about him. One such myth puts in perspective just how powerful this dark god is. It is said that Annihilation is the spirit of Amenth in physical form. Annihilation's energy lives in the golden helm of Annihilation. Those that wear it get possessed with his powerful spirit, and that's how he fought the X-Men. He did it through Genesis. Annihilation's influence is incredibly powerful. Apocalypse is one of the only known things that can hold him off, so this trio of Apocalypse, Genesis, Annihilation is kind of like rock, paper, scissors. Apocalypse beats Annihilation, Annihilation beats Genesis, and Genesis beats Apocalypse. Eventually, the Golden Helm was made into a staff. It had less of an influence over people that way. It wasn't destroyed until Storm came into contact with it, and then she destroyed it because it started whispering to her. I had to put Magneto in first place. I literally have no choice. Magneto might not be a cosmic creator of the universe or capable of destroying a universe with a flick of his wrist, but he has been causing problems for the X-Men for decades, pretty much since the start, and is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful mutant on Earth, so he gets first place. I think my favorite Magneto thing that proves he is a danger to society is that the world literally has a protocol to deal with him. Magneto protocols. You know you've made it in the villain world when people prepare in advance to deal with you, even if you aren't planning anything yet. Magneto also has a very personal stake in the game when it comes to fighting the X-Men and mutants. Him and Professor X were literally best friends. Having to incapacitate your best friend is a really hard thing to do. Plus, when you go to the root of why Magneto does what he does, his message is one that some people can agree on. His actions are just a bit extreme. So people might agree with his message and then get radicalized later. Magneto, with all the horrible things he has done, it could have been worse. His ability to control magnetism is not just metal and magnets for anyone new here. He controls magnetic fields too, which has numerous evil possibilities. We learned how far Magneto was willing to go for his cause when Magneto protocols were activated and he couldn't return to Earth. The combo of that and the X-Men coming after him made Magneto stop holding back, and he ripped the adamantium off Wolverine's skeleton. To make matters worse, Magneto is actually competent and smart. Hate it when your enemy actually knows what they're doing. The day Magneto permanently joined the X-Men on Krakoa was a good day indeed.
Number 10. Fast food almost ruined 90s X-Men. What even is the title of this point? Well, it was the best way I could put it. It was revealed a while back that the 90s animated X-Men series that we all grew up knowing and loving, personally for me this was my buy-in to the X-Men and much of Marvel's superhero world, was almost cancelled because of an Australian fast food chain. No, I'm not joking. Apparently Marvel had negotiated a deal with them to do giveaways of toys for the X-Men series, but the contract also cemented that the toys would then have to appear in the show. However, the designs for these toys apparently were pretty terrible. Artist and producer Will Mineo told Marvel he would not put them in the show. As a result, he and the production company behind the show, Graz, almost lost their control over the series. So we could have had a totally different series, or maybe not one at all, who knows what could have happened. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love when I talk about mutants, I know I love when I talk about mutants, be sure to go check out our X-Men playlist where we all talk about mutants all the time, because that's all that's on the playlist. Number 9. Beast wasn't always blue. Beast might be iconic because of his appearance in the film adaptations, but did you know that him being a blue beast isn't even his main mutation in the comics? And that he didn't always look like this in terms of his X-Men comic book origin. In the prequel films, the serum Nicholas Hoult as Hank takes is intended to be a cure for physical mutations, but this also ends up backfiring when the cure actually kind of intensifies his mutation, making it a lot worse. And because he used some of Mystique's blood, it turns him into a beast with blue fur, because Mystique is blue. You see? In the comics though, Beast's initial mutation is that he just has big hands, big feet, and he's super dexterous and nimble. Kinda similar to what they did in the movies, but a little bit different. Basically, he's kinda like a monkey. Then, as a scientist, he isolates the hormone that causes mutation, which he is then forced to take himself to protect the formula from those who basically want to steal it. This causes him to become a gray or black furred beast, which would later be changed to blue just because of how blacks were basically colored back then. It caused confusion, and then we got Blue Beast. Hank misses his window to use the antidote for this serum though, and then is unable to revert this secondary mutation, with it becoming permanent instead. Number 8. Animated Beast appeared in live action. I just found this one out today, so I thought I would share it with you all. Did you know that the actor who voiced Beast played a truck driver in the bar where Wolverine meets Rogue in the first X-Men film? It's true! George Buza is the voice of Beast in the animated series, and he appears in this iconic scene. Also friends, I need to go back and watch the X-Men films. What is happening with this bar and the lighting in this scene? Why does it give me abandoned warehouse vibes? Was that intentional? Was that just how films were in the early 2000s and late 90s? I guess kind of, actually, stylistically. Number 7. Not very popular. While we typically celebrate the X-Men as one of the most popular hero groups of all time, I even said it in my intro, not everyone is actually a fan of them. In fact, in the comics, many people don't even like them. Despite being a superhero team, they have dealt with persecution from day one and still do even today, even in 2023. Even other heroes who they might call allies or friends at times have seemingly been absent when the mutants were being hunted or persecuted by others just for existing. So while here, in our reality, the X-Men are, you know, the best, just know that in the comics, there are many on Earth who actually consider them more of a nuisance than J. Jonah Jameson considers Spider-Man a menace. That being said, JJ himself is actually oddly a supporter of mutants. He's a big supporter of just like civil rights in general. So while he might hate Spider-Man and many others on Earth are critical, jealous, or even just hate mutants, JJ himself actually fights for their rights, even at the risk of making himself and the Daily Bugle a target of the many mutant hate groups out there. And trust me, there's a lot. Number 6. New Mutants. You may have heard about the New Mutants. They had a film and everything. Oh, sure, it wasn't like the greatest film out there, and sure, Disney seemed to kind of want to bury said film after their merger with Fox, with New Mutants being the last film under the Fox X-Men franchise umbrella, but it happened, and there was actually quite a few things I actually liked about that film. The New Mutants in the comics basically took over the role of what the original X-Men had been like. Initially, the X-Men were just a group of teens trying to figure out their powers while fighting baddies, and the New Mutants were basically like the fresh blood for the superhero mutants, the new younger recruits coming in after the original X-Men had basically like grown up. Well, that was back in like the 80s, and now it's 2023, so the New Mutants aren't quite so new or young anymore. They themselves have grown up, which allowed us to pave the way for the New Mutants. As such, the recent New Mutants series focused instead on the older classic New Mutants who operated both internationally and intergalactically, and then the younger New Mutants who basically stayed based on Krakoa. So now we actually have a new group of New Mutants, but we also have the old New Mutants as well. Are you confused yet? Number 5. The New Marauders. I love this team. Hands down one of my favorite new teams we've gotten, and my favorite mutant team ever, maybe? I mean, I love the X-Men. They are classic, but this spin-off team is just honestly something else. Also, what a powerful team, especially that initial roster. Led by the formerly known Kitty Pryde, who now prefers to simply go by Kate, the New Marauders team is one that instead of harming other mutants, focuses on saving them. That's right, they took the name and they reclaimed it for good. The Marauders were actually once Mr. Sinister's band of goons who did his bidding and were involved in the mutant massacre, but instead, here they are, led by Kate Pryde, initially sailing around the world to rescue mutants being held prisoner by their own nations so they can safely bring them home to Krakoa, and now they've actually gone intergalactic, sailing through space and fighting aliens to do basically just that. Number 4. The Limbo Embassy. Dark Web was a weird time, and to really highlight how weird that event was, I have an update for you. So, Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen, one of my favorite tragic mutant characters and X-Men villains of all time, recently turned over a new leaf. During Dark Web, she wanted Jean's memories of her son, baby Christopher, aka Nathan Christopher Summers, aka Cable as most people know him, as she felt she had missed out on his upbringing, which honestly she did, so I understand why she'd want that. What did she do to get these memories? Well, she ended up taking over Limbo from Magic under apparently the guise of being good, though in the New Mutant series this actually seems to have been written more as a genuine turning point for Maddie, but never mind. And then once again, she unleashed a demon army on New York, because it worked so well the last time, Maddie. In the end, Jean gave her the memories she wanted without hassle willingly, turning Maddie firmly to the good side with her becoming the ally of the X-Men. Because, you know, she was like, oh, you just would have just given them to me and I could have just asked you, and actually you helped me to get resurrected. Oh, okay. Maybe we should just be friends. And in the aftermath of Dark Web, we were left with a weird gift to New York from Maddie's Limbo, the Limbo Embassy, which also happens to be where Ben Reilly's villainous Chasm is being held prisoner after he and Janine as Hallows Eve attempted to usurp Madeline as ruler of Limbo. Yeah, that's a weird thing. That's gotta be a weird thing on like the New York landscape, you know? It's just a big demon tower. Like, wow, alright. Number 3. Magneto once led the team. Or rather, ran the school and led a team. When Professor X went to space to go be with his Shi'ar waifu, Lilandra, Empress of the Shi'ar, who had space medical treatments that Professor X needed to live at the time, Magneto took over for him. While many people think of Magneto as a straight-up X-Men villain who is sometimes an ally of Professor X's because of their long-standing history in the films, in the comics, he's not only been an ally, but he's also at this point been an anti-hero, straight-up hero, and even team leader on the side of good. In fact, if you saw the Magneto miniseries that was announced and is expected to release in August, this is actually a retrospective series that takes us back to his time as headmaster of the school and leader of the New Mutants team, which I think is pretty cool. I don't think a lot of people know this about Magneto. Number 2. Almost cancelled. If you can believe it, as popular as the X-Men are now, this wasn't always the case. In fact, there was even a time when the X-Men comics were cancelled, with almost no possibility of a return in sight. It wasn't until the days of Chris Claremont that the X-Men would truly be cemented as a Marvel staple. Sure, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee started the X-Men off, but there were multiple instances during those days where X-Men actually wasn't doing well and then ended up being cancelled, and people did didn't even know when or if it would actually come back. Honestly, people probably didn't even care back in the day because no one really liked the series that much. However, Marvel actually never gave up on the team, and despite the series being cancelled in 1970, after 66 issues, they did their best for 5 years to feature the X-Men anywhere they could in their other books, with the hope of seeing the team return one day. And guess what? It worked. It wouldn't be until the summer of 1975's giant-sized X-Men #1, but they would return with a new story written by Len Wein, who also would be a very iconic X-Men writer as well. Number 1. Control over life and death. Would you believe me if I told you that the X-Men now have control over life and death? If you aren't up to date on the current ongoing mutants in the comics, this is what is happening in the current era. I like to refer to it as the Krakoan era. Krakoa as in the sentient mutant island which all mutants moved to, creating their own nation there. I know this might sound familiar with the prior existence of places like Utopia and Genosha in the comics, but this time around it actually has been pretty different. Namely because mutants now control the ability to resurrect themselves, becoming in essence immortal by using the Five, a group of 5 super gifted mutants, to create clones of fallen mutants and then using mental backup stored in Cerebro to restore not only their bodies but also the minds of those that they lost as well. Initially this was reserved for mutants who they only actually had backups for, then it was expanded with the help of the Scarlet Witch to any mutant who had basically ever existed, then it was further expanded when their secret got out to all of humanity that they were, resurrecting themselves, with them even bringing back other non-mutant heroes like Captain America during the AXE Judgment Day event. And after that they were like, well, I guess we gotta start bringing some people back, so we'll make a thing for that. Jean, you're in charge. Multiple Man is such an amazingly powerful character. He is Jamie Madrox, and his mutant power is that he can create duplicates, nicknamed dupes of himself to an almost unlimited extent. Initially in the comics he tapped out at creating 40 dupes, but now we've seen him create honestly a whole laboratory, staffing, and more than that. His duplicates can go out in the world and live, and when he absorbs them back, ideally before, they die, he absorbs everything they have known and learned, all their memories, their experiences, their skills, and their knowledge. Because of this, Jamie is extremely skilled and is also considered a PhD multiple times over at this point. Dr. Madrox, everyone. Beast is a character that people think of as being someone who's very into books, very well read, got a great vocabulary, and has had almost since the beginning. While that is part of who Hank is, it's also important to remember his actual mutation, which of course has to do with him being super agile and dexterous, while also having oversized hands and feet. That's primarily what we focused on initially with this character. As time went on, Beast ended up getting a secondary mutation, or rather having his mutation accelerate pretty much, to the point that he also grew fur, fangs, and in some instances has also been shown having claws to a certain extent. I think George Bauza has actually summed it up pretty accurately when he says that Beast for the most part is a pacifist. He's a lover, he's not a fighter, but when pushed to the limit, you better watch out. While Beast isn't known to be a very aggressive character normally, when he is in a tight spot, if he has to be, he can actually be one of the most deadly fighters that we have. He's not only very strong physically, but he's also very dexterous, which makes him a hard opponent to deal with. And as we saw more recently during the Krakoan era, when he wants to be, he can be quite brutal and even deadly. Borderline savage. Beast was a member of X Factor back on the original team before they were ever known for being a detective agency. Back in the old school days when it was just like the original roster but brought back. The original roster of the X-Men, that is. If you thought Fire Fist was just a character that existed in the Deadpool movies, think again. He's actually based off of a Marvel Comics character of the same name. Okay, so the two characters are somewhat different, but Fire Fist is a mutant who does go by the nickname of Rusty, just like in the movies. In a way, his story does mirror the one that we see in Deadpool 2, but instead of going to a superpowered prison, Rusty was instead arrested by military police after his pyrokinetic powers first manifested. And instead of becoming an ally of Deadpool in the comics, Rusty was rescued by the original X Factor team, who were government sanctioned and were basically just the X-Men in disguise. As Fire Fist, Rusty has been shown to be a pretty powerful pyrokinetic and can even use his abilities to do things like bend metal with his bare hands, because through touch he can basically heat up the metal to make it malleable, so kinda looks like he has super strength when he does it. Pretty cool. cool. Honestly, I love Boom Boom. She probably isn't one of the most powerful characters that's on our list, to be real with you, but she is a character that I feel is often just underappreciated and undervalued in terms of her abilities, which is why I decided to feature her here, because that's basically what this list is all about. She's come a long way since she was first introduced in terms of her control over her abilities. Boom Boom is able to create time explosives, time bombs. She can control how long those energy-based constructs have until they explode, and she can even now control somewhat the direction at which they ripple outwards in terms of their explosive effects. Not only this, but there's also a certain level of stealth that she can apply to her time bombs, by muffling the sound somewhat, allowing her to operate in a more stealthily manner. Something you would never think of for a character whose powers are tied to, you know, explosive abilities. Boom Boom has worked with X Factor, but has also worked with X-Force as well. Prodigy is likely one of the smartest characters that we have in the Marvel multiverse. Prodigy himself is already an extremely smart person. However, with his mutation, he's able to gain the skills and knowledge of the people around him, which means that there is almost nothing he doesn't know or is incapable of learning due to being around so many gifted people in his life, so many skilled and smart people. He basically has a type of telepathy which allows him to tap into other people's abilities. It's also really interesting because this seems to happen pretty much subconsciously, like reflexively, so it's not necessarily something that he has to think about doing or control it like most telepaths, it just kind of happens for him. This has meant in the past that during a fight, Prodigy can actually anticipate the moves of his opponent because of his ability, allowing him to subconsciously tap into their mind. So without thinking about it, he can reflexively anticipate and block attacks, which I think is an extremely powerful ability that not a lot of people even talk about when it comes to this character. So yeah, he's a genius with almost unlimited potential in terms of what he can learn and know at any given moment, but he also could be quite useful in a fight considering his defensive capabilities when facing an opponent. Banshee is another more classic X Factor character. I feel like when it comes to X Factor, a lot of people think more of Banshee's daughter Siren than they usually think of him. This is because Siren is probably more well known due to her being on a more well known run or a series or just a roster of X Factor. But like daughter, like father, Sean Cassidy is also pretty powerful when it comes to what he can do. He also of course has sonic abilities which allow him to produce a sonic scream, allow him to fly, and also give him the abilities to put people in a trance-like state and even make them unconscious. Yeah, you can just knock them out. But the other thing when it comes to Sean is that he has other abilities outside of his mutant powers, and that's I think what makes him also super cool. He's a gifted detective, non-armed combatant, and is also really good with projectile weapons as well, being known to be a very good marksman. So just all around, he has a lot that he brings to the table. He's a strong character that a lot of people just don't often think of. At least, you know, I would say not in the modern day as much. Often seeming to rank lower when it comes to polls for everyone's favorite Summers brother, Havoc is still a powerful hero and a super interesting character. Ever the middle child, the amount of struggle and misfortune Alex Summers has seen in his life is honestly pretty unprecedented. He never really wanted to become an X-Men, but ultimately resided to doing so because he found otherwise being in mortal peril every day seemed to have become something inescapable for him, and so that's kind of how he ended up becoming a hero. He didn't want to be one, but he just kind of got roped into it. Havoc is also a member of one of my favorite teams, not X Factor, sorry X Factor, you're great too, but I'm talking about Hellions, and we're not talking about Emma Frost Hellions here, we are talking about the eponymous series from 2020. Havoc emits plasma bursts which radiate out from him in circular waves from all around his body, also meaning that we get some really sweet artwork whenever people are drawing his powers. He sometimes struggles to control his powers, which is why he can be seen as kind of dangerous or more of a loose cannon at times. His plasma bursts come from cosmic energies that he can draw on, and it's pretty much implied that he's always passively absorbing these energies, so he's always, you know, juiced and ready to use his powers, for the most part. Some may not think of these two half-elf French-Canadian mutants as being powerful because for a time, for their powers to work, they actually had to be together. They had to be right by each other. We're talking about the siblings Northstar and Aurora, though chiefly for this point I'm going to focus on Aurora here. Although now their powers can work without one another, still being together does increase their power levels, and being apart does, you know, lower it a little bit. Both siblings share the power of photokinesis and can use the light that they produce to do various things. Aurora, Jean-Marie, can use the light to shock, blast, and soothe. Initially these two siblings needed to hold hands to boost their powers, but now just being in close proximity gives them an actual boost. Like her brother Northstar, Aurora has also been a member of X Factor during their time as a detective agency. Northstar is another character that people often don't think of. Just because you don't think of him though doesn't mean that he isn't a powerhouse. When it comes to some of the fastest characters in the Marvel multiverse, there are a few people that I tend to think of personally. One of them of course is the character that many people think of, of, Quicksilver, and another is honestly the Eternal Makari, who does not get talked about enough. Eternals obviously are made by Celestials, so Makari is pretty insanely fast, also kind of basically a superhero version of Hermes. And weirdly, Quicksilver is often thought of as being the fastest character in the Marvel universe, but I would actually argue that there are a lot of people that are faster than Quicksilver, and that list would include Northstar. Northstar can travel almost at the speed of light due to his abilities that he gets through his mutation, which makes him pretty fast, to be honest. While he can't get to exactly the speed of light, he can get 99% of the way, it's believed, which is still insanely fast. But like I said, a lot of people don't think of Northstar just because he isn't a character who is as prominently featured as someone like Quicksilver. Richter over time has become more and more powerful in the comics to the point that he's basically like a masterful druid character. Most people just don't think of Richter, but he is insanely powerful at this point in history. He's kind of similar to another underappreciated character I love to talk about from the Inhumans, Crystal. Crystal also has elemental powers, and Richter has powers that basically kind of like connect him to the earth, and they're typically seismic in origins. At least that's where things started out. But it does connect him to a lot of elements as well. He has shown skill over manipulating various different elements of the planet Earth, including the Earth itself, plant life, lava, and seismic energy. He can use his control over seismic energy to basically create earthquakes, or more traditionally emit shock waves out from him, which radiate sort of outwards. Get it? Like Richter scale? Except his last name is actually spelled the same way, but his codename is spelled with an O in place of the E.
Wolverine's healing factor is a mystery. It can make him come back from anything, it seems. It's truly amazing what Wolverine has survived. He survived being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima, being one of the men at the Valentine's Day Massacre, multiple world wars, fighting death, being completely destroyed aside from a single drop of himself. How is he still standing? I don't get it. I think Deadpool explains it best. He survives because he's popular. You can't kill off Wolverine. He's Wolverine. He's iconic. Every time he goes away, we want him back. So is it a powerful healing factor keeping the hero around, or fan devotion? I'm not complaining though. Love our Canadian king. Looking forward to seeing Hugh Jackman don the blue and yellow in Wolverine and Deadpool in a few months. Bailey Hoskins is thebomb.com. Literally, he is a bomb. He can blow up, but only once. His power seems ridiculous because that was the point. Bailey debuted in Worst X-Men Ever by Max Bemis. Max wanted to explore what it would be like if someone joined the X-Men that was basically useless until death. Still, you have to wonder, how does Bailey even know how to detonate without ever being able to practice? Is it like breathing? He just knows. How often did he get close to detonation just from sneezing wrong? He got a power suit at one point, but was usually just his human appearing self. His miniseries is cute and pokes fun at the X-Men franchise, so if that's your thing, check it out. Lila Cheney is a rock star and ally to the X-Men. Lila wasn't always a good guy. She did try to steal the Earth once, but she eventually came around. She is capable of intergalactic teleportation. The problem is she can't control it. She also can't travel short distances. It has to be thousands of miles away. I don't understand why. The current explanation is that to teleport she creates a Tachyon field around herself. The field converts matter into particles that are faster than the speed of light. The only thing she can control is what direction she goes in. Apparently once she activates her powers, they just go before she can even think stop. She's already super far away. But in order for her to go anywhere, she needs to specifically know it. If that is the case, shouldn't she just be able to picture her kitchen and go there? To get around the teleportation glitch, she set up a sort of base point, the Dyson sphere. She goes there first, then to her next point, kind of like a plane connection. The other thing is that if her voice is somewhere, she can teleport there. It can cause problems because she is a famous singer, her voice is in a lot of places, but if she has to know specifically where she wants to go, shouldn't just having her voice somewhere not cut it? I don't get it. Ariel the alien is known for her teleportation powers and ability to persuade anyone. You might also recognize her for her bright, over-the-top outfits. She was designed in the 80s and it shows in the most iconic way. The Met Gala is coming up soon and I can't help but think she would fit right in. Ariel is from the planet Coconut Grove and it looks like your average 80s nightclub. All Coconut Grove aliens are capable of teleportation using doors. If there are no doors, too bad. But what I'm confused about is that this ability is apparently not limited to just Coconut Grove residents. It's suggested that anyone could do it if they have the right hands and a good grounding in subjective physics. Has this ever been explored again? I don't think so. Let me know if I'm forgetting something. The only other time I've seen door teleportation like this was in Monsters, Inc. In addition to the door powers, Ariel and her family are the mutants of their world, as they are capable of super persuasion. Ariel is described as she who speaks like water running across the stones. Ariel can make people do or think almost anything she wants using her charming, persuasive voice. However, it seems like a lot of the effectiveness is based on what language she uses, how she knows what to use. I don't know, probably lots of trial and error. Ariel ended up in San Francisco and then joined the X-Men and stayed affiliated with the team since. Hector Mendoza has transparent skin. How is that useful? I'm not sure. Maybe for scientists to study the functions of the human body in real time. Hector did have another power, and it caused the see-through skin. It was an invisibility field. The unfortunate part was that the invisibility didn't work all the way and his skin turned invisible instead of all of him. I don't really know what would be worse, your mutant ability manifesting seemingly halfway and you walk around with your organs out all the time, or if it actually manifested completely and you were invisible forever. He was also able to transfer his invisibility field by touching someone else. He would go back to normal and whoever he touched was affected. And I do suppose in a battle situation that would be a good kind of like psych out tactic. Personally, I'm not used to seeing my organs, so if I were to ever grab this guy with malicious intent, seeing my internal organs would absolutely send me into a panic and he would win. I'm still confused though. Hector was one of the mutants that was depowered after M-Day, so he would have just returned to normal again. Very similar to Hector, the same but different, is Glob. Glob is made of bioparaffin wax or living wax. He is a glob of it that commonly takes the form of a human body. The wax is flammable, so he can become a flaming version of himself. He can also fling bits of himself. I have to wonder about that one though. Are the bits kind of like fingernails? Like when I lose a piece of my fingernail, it will just grow back? I'm assuming because he is never lacking wax. He is considered invincible since his wax makes him resistant to damage. He once took a bomb for the Institute and came out fine. Tough kid. I would say that another one of his superpowers is that he's funny. Zorn is a confusing character overall. His origin was one thing and then it was another. He was actually Magneto. Wait, never mind. We need Magneto alive for something else. Okay, Zorn is actually real and also his head is a star. Sorry? What? Someone's head being a star? That's wild. It's a marvel he keeps that thing star even if it is just mini. Because it's a star, he could reverse the natural state of it to make a black hole. It also means he has magnetokinesis, or the ability to control magnetic fields. That's why he could fake being Magneto. The star also produces a blinding light because if you were to look him in the eyes, you would be staring into a mini sun. It can also incinerate you, so you will not make it out of there no matter what. He also, because his head is a star, doesn't need to breathe or eat or drink water. I've never got that in anything. If someone has a body, how is it sustained without those things? I don't get it, unfortunately. Give me a few days of thinking time, I will get there. Zorn is also a vibe checker. He knows if someone has passed in his general vicinity. I think it has something to do with the fact that he can feel the movement of energy and emotions, I think. Ice Cream, as a whole, I don't understand, but the powers especially. Ice Cream is a mutant that can turn into ice cream. Any flavor, he's not limited. It does have its benefits. Turning into a pile of ice cream means he can slip through grates and tight spaces. However, I can't imagine he is good on the offensive front unless his opponent is lactose intolerant. I suppose he could turn into ice cream and drown someone from the inside out, then that person would have to go to the afterlife with the story that they drowned from ice cream, and that's just funny or embarrassing. The last time I talked about ice cream, I mentioned that in addition to ice cream, he could even turn into a banana split. Someone commented on the video pointing out that a banana split isn't ice cream. You're right, I know that. That's why I'm so confused. Who came up with this? Ice Cream has only appeared about like 2 times in the comics. I wonder why. Though he has limited appearances, that does not mean he has no fans. The additional confusing thing about him is he doesn't spell it ice cream with like the letter I, it's E-Y-E, and there's no explanation as to why that is. Soft Serve is a big fan of ice cream. Sometimes talking about certain characters brings me physical pain, and Soft Serve is one of them. Soft Serve is a mutant that poops ice cream. I hope no one is watching this video while eating ice cream. If you are, I'm sorry. Soft serve can create any flavor of ice cream, and apparently it's actually pretty good. Forge tried it and said it was great. He definitely took one for the team. I don't think many X-Men are strong enough to do that. Obviously, the power is weird. It's weird, so how did it happen? It turns out that she isn't really using her own body to create the ice cream. Her body is actually a portal to the ice cream dimension. So the portal on her body just happens to be in an unfortunate location. Other than her being a big fan of ice cream, the pair are not related. Soft serve also, shockingly, has only 2 appearances. Mystique has recently been revealed to be a gene shaper, not just a shapeshifter, which is very cool and very confusing. The difference, to put it simply, shapeshifters change their shape, they mimic someone else's look. Gene shapers become that person, rewriting their DNA until they are a copy. That's how Mystique was able to become Nightcrawler's father instead of mother. She gave herself male working anatomy. The thing that has fans wondering though is if she can become an exact gene level copy of someone, why can't she replicate mutant abilities? She can copy them, sure, we've seen that when she copied Wolverine's claws, but that was all surface level. She never actually fully gains the powers. It turns out that the reason might be simple, but also makes everything way more complicated. Mystique appears to currently be limited when it comes to mimicking the X gene. Regular genes walk in the park, she doesn't even need to think about it. It's the X gene that's tricky. Does that mean she can't? No, she probably can if we are being honest. Now that the big reveal of Nightcrawler's parents has been done, Mystique's writers have the ability to explore her X-gene mimicking abilities.
Mr. Sinister was once brilliant scientist and geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Essex. Nathaniel, however, turned to more mad science after the loss of his son, sadly. When offered an opportunity by Apocalypse to become more evolved, Essex ended up taking it. He claimed a new name based off of something his wife had called him upon learning of his true nature, Sinister. Mr. Sinister still seems obsessed with finding a way to fix his long-dead son. Sinister has a particular obsession with the Summers family and even created Madeline Pryor, playing matchmaker to set her up with Cyclops so that the two would marry and produce a perfect mutant child, which Sinister later hoped to procure and study. Sinister also managed to devise a plan that allowed him to completely alter reality, making everything and everyone a part of his own sinister universe in Sins of Sinister. Basically like becoming a god, like becoming ruler of the universe. Now don't get me wrong, I think a lot of folks understand just how deadly this next mutant is, but I'm still not sure if folks see him as a real threat just because of where he's at right now. But a friendly reminder that when Vulcan first turned up in the comics during Deadly Genesis, that is just what he was. Someone who was threatening the X-Men after feeling as though he'd been abandoned by them. Vulcan is the other Summers brother. There is Cyclops, there's Havoc, and of course there is Vulcan, the youngest. Gabriel Summers, however, is maybe the most deadly of these 3. Vulcan toiled to seize the Shi'ar Empire for himself after marrying Deathbird. When his father, Corsair, demanded that Vulcan stop his ruthless pursuit of power, by the way, Vulcan responded by killing him. Declaring himself emperor caused a great rift in the Shi'ar Empire, plunging it into a civil war. He also at times has been just generally a kind of awful brother to Havoc. Not cool, Vulcan. Honestly, this next villain is a terrifying one, and one that was kind of short-lived in terms of his appearances when you consider just how horrific he was. We're talking about Gregory Terrariton, aka Slayback. Slayback was a Deadpool villain who also had tanglings with Weapon X and kind of with mutants a little bit as a mercenary. He ended up being hired by a group who was hoping to use Deadpool's healing factor to find a cure for the legacy virus. Inherently, this doesn't sound super villainous when I say it like that. It's like, well, that would be good, wouldn't it? But at the same time, they weren't doing this out of the kindness of their heart or to just save mutants, but they were simply doing it so they could make a fortune, as once they found the cure, they planned to charge a massive amount for it. Factor 3? That sounds like some kind of toothpaste. This is another villainous team composed of mutants but led by an alien known as Mutant Master. You might not remember it because it was only around for a few issues and also first appeared way early on in X-Men issue number 28 back in 1967. This team popped up a few times and would often force mutants into doing their bidding, often mind-controlling Banshee to attempt to kidnap or help kidnap Professor X. Fortunately, in issue number 39, Factor 3 was defeated for good and hasn't bothered the the X-Men since, at least not as far as I know. But were they to come back, who is to say what kind of chaos they could sow? After all, they were a pretty impressive threat when they first showed up on the scene. Roughhouse is definitely a lesser known villain, though that doesn't mean we shouldn't be intimidated by him. Although he starts out as a villain in the Wolverine comics and a brute, he later kind of becomes Wolverine's ally after he was sold off by General Koi to be used for experimentation. Pretty messed up. Even Wolverine felt bad for this guy, despite being his rival and his enemy on Madripoor. Wolverine decided to go after him and as such became embroiled in a major political conflict in Tierra Verde, not to be confused with Terra Verde, a different republic that also exists in Marvel Comics. Despite Roughhouse saving Wolverine though and becoming temporary allies with him, Roughhouse would later go back to being a straight up villain of Logan, even renewing his partnership with Bloodscream, another lesser known villain from the 80s, later on. The Marauders are a team a lot of folks don't think about being a threat, especially not anymore considering we have since redeemed the team name with Kate Pryde's heroic Marauders team. But let's not forget what this team was capable of back in the day, and which powerhouse of a mutant brought this team together. It might surprise you to know that Gambit actually created the villainous Marauders team. Of course, he didn't do it because he was truly a villain deep down or anything like that. He basically did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret in the comics and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? It wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister had helped Gambit to control his powers by, well, removing a part of his brain. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, resulting in the, as we know it, the Mutant Massacre. And Sinister also had the team hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. So they've done some pretty crazy things. Pretty impressive, crazy, villainous things, you know? Unus is of course one of my favorite X-Men villains. I do not think he gets enough love. He is a classic who first appeared on the scene back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days. He was also a villain during the House of M era, though more in the sense that, you know, most mutants were kind of villainous because, you know, they basically were trying to rule the world or were on the verge of ruling the world. Unus the Untouchable is his full mantle, and when we first met him, he was using his mutant powers to cheat in the wrestling ring. Well, I don't know if we can really, you know, call using your mutant abilities cheating per se. I guess in the sense that they weren't being disclosed and that he wasn't wrestling other folks who were on the same level as him, but instead was, you know, wrestling with just regular humans who just had no powers. As you may have guessed, Unus generates basically a powerful force field which he can control that prevents him from being touched. Unus the Untouchable. The first time around, he gave the whole X-Men team major trouble, and it was only thanks to Beast's smarts that they were actually able to defeat him. Beast was able to make it so that Unus could no longer control his powers, so that they were on full force all the time, which also prevented Unus from eating or drinking anything. Needless to say, they wore Unus down and he ended up changing his tune and agreed to stop his villainy. The Blob is a classic villain who I just think does not get enough love for how powerful he is. Honestly, back in the early days of the X-Men, after learning he was a mutant, the Blob almost single-handedly took down the entire X-Men team. They at first attempted to recruit him, and that's when he learned he was a mutant, but after learning of that fact and that his abilities were actually mutant powers, the Blob decided that he didn't actually need the X-Men and that he was actually more powerful than all of them combined and cooler than them. And when they refused to let him leave, since they had revealed their secret identities to him, this was back when the X-Men had secret identities, by the way, and attempted to keep him captive in the X-Mansion, after narrowly escaping, he swore to get revenge on them, and honestly, kind of rightfully so. He returned with the rest of the circus and sideshow performers that he worked with, intimidating the ringleader into even taking orders from him. They returned to the X-Mansion and very nearly ended the X-Men team. The Legacy virus is one of the most deadly threats we've seen in the comics. We have talked about the Terrigen Mists on part 1, but the Legacy virus plagued the X-Men and the whole world of mutants after being released accidentally by Mr. Sinister. In fact, Mr. Sinister felt so bad about this, he even tried to work out a cure himself for the virus. As much as he's a villain, Sinister still loves mutant kind and definitely did not want to see them completely wiped out. The virus itself was created by Strife, Cable's evil clone. It only affected those with the mutant X gene. The first time a mutant used their powers after contracting the virus, you would see it activate. This original strain of the virus basically acted like a fast-acting cancer in those who were affected, and we know it as Legacy one virus, the first strain of the legacy virus. And that isn't all. There were actually 2 strains for the legacy virus, and while the second strain was not as fast acting as the first, I would still argue that it was worse. This strain of the virus was slower acting and would actually cause mutants to lose control of their powers before they die, basically becoming a ticking, superpowered, uncontrollable time bomb. But before this happened, symptoms of those suffering from it would include skin lesions, cough, fever, and autoimmune deficiency, lowering their immune system and making them more vulnerable to other illnesses. So yeah, basically this version of the virus was like the mutant version of our world's AIDS. Pretty terrible. Bastion is now more iconic than ever when it comes to being one of the big players in the X-Men Rogues and Threats gallery. Many people think of Sentinels when they think of big X-Men cybernetic threats, but Bastion is unique in that he is basically a living Sentinel. In the comics, he is mostly just a machine, of course, but one who was raised by humans, giving him human-like traits. But in the X-Men 97 series, he is a literal combination of the two, making him even cooler in my mind. In this series, the Siege Perilous is not involved in his origin story, but instead it was a piece of Nimrod who influenced his creation, instead of him literally kind of being a version of Nimrod, making him part Sentinel and part human here, a literal living machine. Bastion claims to be combining tech and humans together, creating Prime Sentinels, in order to save humanity with his project Operation Zero Tolerance here. But I wonder if, like many other Sentinels out there, he actually might be serving more of the robots' interests than humanity in the long run. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe we won't. Depends on when this video releases. There might be more information after the time of this recording. What are some crazy X-Men threats that you would love to see in X-Men 97? Let me know in the comments. Most people don't think of the Terrigen Mists as being a danger to mutant kind. Most people probably don't think much of the Terrigen Mists at all. But they're there, and you can bet that they are harming mutants if they are around them. As we learned in Humans vs. X-Men when the Terrigen Mists were revealed to be toxic to mutants. Mutants who were exposed to the clouds on Earth ran the risk of straight up dying as a result of exposure. In fact, some actually did. Cyclops, for example, the leader of the X-Men. So what most people might just see as clouds that give the Inhumans their powers, or allow them to access their powers rather, triggering them, to the X-Men team, these are basically clouds of death. Man, I love this next X-Men threat. This is the group known as Horticulture. If you know me, if you've been here before, you know I love Horticulture, and if you're new, welcome in. I love Horticulture. Horticulture is an amazing group made up of a bunch of botanists who each have their own specialty in the field. They also so happen to be a group of geriatric women as well. Their goal is to protect plant life on Earth. It doesn't sound so villainous until you realize how much both humanity and mutant kind stand to threaten Mother Nature simply with their existence, pretty much. Sabretooth is one of those villains who I feel is often undermined and underappreciated. Some people don't think much of Victor, thinking of him as no more than a violent and unhinged enemy for Wolverine. But fun fact, he didn't even first appear as a Wolverine villain. No, he actually first appeared in Iron Fist issue number 14 back in the 1970s. Yeah, he was actually kinda like Iron Fist's foe first, if you can believe that. Over the years though, as we've come to learn more about Victor Creed, we learn he too was a mutant and one with a vendetta against Wolverine, who had killed his brother. Sabretooth wasn't actually upset about the loss of someone that, you know, he loved so much, like his brother, his family member, as he was upset about the loss of someone he ritualistically tormented every year on his brother's birthday, which is why he took to ruining Wolverine's birthday once he'd found out that Logan was of course responsible. Victor might seem like he's all brawn, no brain, but he's actually a master strategist and tactician who is surprisingly good at playing mind games with his enemies, manipulating them into believing what he wants them to believe and often tricking them into committing terrible acts seemingly on their own. Coming up next, good old Donnie Pierce. Gosh, I love Donnie Pierce. I personally feel like Donald Pierce being a villain of a sort of bygone era is a character and a villain who just does not get enough love, so that's why I decided to include him here on this list. He has accomplished some pretty impressive things, and way before we ever had Bastion, Donald Pierce was it when it came to cybernetic style X-Men villains. Or at least, you know, he was one of the big ones. He's accomplished some pretty cool stuff in his time and almost took out Wolverine with his creations Albert and LCD, who would go on to change their programming so they could instead live independently from Pierce's control. Honestly, fair enough. Still, he came close with that plan, and he's done a lot of other pretty terrible things before, to be real with you. I mean, I love that Bastion is getting this like amazing like comeback time, but I do wonder, like, what about Donald Pierce? Will we ever see Donald Pierce again? That would be great. The Shadow King is a threat that not many people focus on anymore when it comes to the X-Men. His time for the most part seems to have passed, although he does still appear here and there, but when it comes to his accomplishments and how iconic he's been throughout the years, I think it's important that we all remember his existence. He exists and he's cool. And have I been feeling like he's about to pop up everywhere lately? I have. And is that probably wrong? Probably. But it's just because I kinda love the Shadow King, guys. I'm going through a Shadow King phase right now. Shadow King did, after all, almost completely take out the X-Men at one point, and he has manipulated many of them throughout his life, as well as many of their allies. In certain alternate realities, he actually has also been successful in defeating the X-Men, so there you go. Cassandra Nova might seem like a weirdo, and trust me, she most definitely is a weirdo. If you were thinking that, you are correct. But at the same time, just because her origin is super weird doesn't mean she should be discounted as a villain. In fact, she might be responsible for one of the sole most terrifying panels that exists in Marvel Comics. This one from the E is for Extinction story arc. Cassandra Nova is often known for hating mutants and being completely devoid of empathy. Recently this changed, but her gaining empathy honestly didn't make her any less terrifying. It just allowed her to temporarily ally herself with the mutants. When it comes to Emma Frost, I think she is a villain most people don't expect to be super deadly because, well, she's now reformed and an X-Men team member. But that being said, with Emma there are two sides to her, almost. There is the time from before when she was with the Hellfire Club and she was an X-Men villain, and there's the time from after, when she ended up finding some redemption and even joining up with the X-Men team and becoming a hero. Yeah, Emma in the before times was ruthless and definitely was a villain that you wouldn't want to mess with. I think a lot of folks now kind of discount her as a villain because, you know, she's been a hero for so long now, but I definitely think it would be interesting to see Emma return to her villain roots and to also see how her time as a hero may have changed her approach to villainy. Back in the day, there was almost nothing too dastardly in regards to what she was willing to do. Remember when she swapped bodies with Storm? That was just downright diabolical. Orcus is another group that seems like a pretty big threat when it comes to mutant kind, even bigger than horticulture. Most people might not take them as seriously because they are newer on the scene, but Orcus is pretty impressive when you consider that they're made up of parts of all of the groups who basically felt threatened by mutant kind's growth and evolution in the Dawn of X era. This included many of their enemies who did not disappear but instead banded together in resistance to the mutants rising up, becoming honestly even more powerful, as well as former mutant allies who had actually begun to grow concerned over how much power and influence the mutants were gaining from banding together. You know it's not good when the allies are joining up with that team, you know what I mean? That's like a lot of power. It's not just enemies, it's allies that have become enemies. Nimrod might sound like a goofy threat and villain for the X-Men in terms of his name, but the choice of name here actually does come from a different meaning for the word than you're likely thinking of. A lot of people think Nimrod and they think dum-dum. Nimrod though can also mean a particularly skilled hunter, which is just exactly what Nimrod is here. Nimrod is an exceptional sentinel who can adapt and improve as they hunt down mutants, learning and changing as they go based on the mutants and experiences that they encounter during their mission. Nimrod has also proven to be exceptionally terrifying, I would say, in recent years, revealing that they are not simply working for humanity, but instead are actually working for AI life, fighting to eradicate not just mutants, but all living beings. So humanity, also watch out. Even worse for humanity, because humanity, we do have some superpowered people in Marvel, but humans are just squishy. They're squishy people. While not naturally born, this Spider-Girl made a single appearance in Avenging Spider-Man in issue number 16. She had similar powers to Spider-Man, but was made of a combination of spider and mutant DNA by the Jackal, who used materials found in Mr. Sinister's lab. Honestly, the things you could probably make with materials found in Mr. Sinister's lab. As such, she also had the additional powers to shapeshift into a giant spider with 5 human eyes. While in this shape, she also had the power to spit purple mucus and even fire optic blasts from her eyes. Makes you think there might be some Summers DNA mixed somewhere in there. I know, that's what I'm thinking. She ended up rampaging across the city after the Jackal released her as part of a test. Fortunately, she was apprehended by Superior Spider-Man and the X-Men, who explained that she seemed to be a mutant and ended up taking her in after, of course, defeating her. We never really heard anything about her after that though, so who knows where she is. Maybe she was on Krakoa. Spider-Girl was created by Christopher Yost and Paco Medina. Spiral has been an enemy of the X-Men, but would also become a member of Storm and Psylocke's X-Force team. She was a human known as Rita Hayward, who would end up in the Mojoverse and become part part of a time paradox, having been attacked by her future mutated self, Spiral. She was a stunt woman who ended up falling in love with Longshot during his time on Earth and returned with him to the Mojoverse. When his plan to defeat Mojo tragically failed, Rita was captured and was modified by Mojo to have 6 arms, one of which was completely cybernetic. Spiral herself is part cyborg, part human mutate as a result of the modifications performed on her. She can also do magic by dancing around. That's a thing she can do. She was the one responsible acting as an agent of Mojo for giving Psylocke her cybernetic eyes as well. Ariel hails from the Coconut Grove, an extraterrestrial planet, and possesses the mutant ability of persuasion. Additionally, her alien physiology grants her teleportation capabilities. Notably, she is connected to another Ariel, her ancestor, who actually visited Earth and served as the inspiration for William Shakespeare's play The Tempest. Yes, that Ariel. The Ariel we're focusing on here, though, not her predecessor, arrived on Earth on a mission to gather mutant samples for study, as her people were intrigued by Earth's mutants' evolutionary processes. During her stay on Earth, she became associated with the fallen angels and would later cross paths with the X-Men in San Francisco, back when they were in San Francisco, joining them temporarily. If or when the fallen angels return, I think it could be cool to have like a deep cut like Ariel make an appearance next time around. I don't know if we'll ever see the fallen angels again. I kinda hope we do. You know? I think I'm ready for another Fallen Angel series actually. I'm ready to try again. Let's try again, shall we? While Candy wasn't necessarily a member, she did help the X-Men and made her first appearance in X-Men issue number 31 in the 60s. Candy Southern was a longtime friend of Angel's and would later end up dating Warren. She would also team up with the X-Men to help find Warren when he went missing after learning of the fellow mutant team's existence and Warren Worthington III's role as hero, Angel. Candy would later break up with Warren and was killed by X-Factor enemy and former friend Cameron Hodge. Cameron Hodge, another villain that I feel like we do not talk about enough, but who is terrible. Candace Southern wasn't a mutant and didn't have any powers, but she was skilled in business. So I can see why her and Angel hit it off actually. I would love to see her somehow be resurrected and return to the comics in, I don't know, in an X-Corp series, let's say. I thought maybe she might return in the previous one, but I don't remember seeing Candy there. That previous X-Corp series was so short-lived. Oh, tragic. Beak's mutation ended up being slightly more unfortunate in comparison to some of the other more well-known core members of the X-Men team. Beak is Barnal Bohusk, and his mutant powers are simply that he looks and shares similar attributes to a bird. His bones are hollow and light, meant to lend well to flying, and he has feathers which should also help him to fly, and yet he's not a very good flyer. In fact, initially, Beak couldn't fly at all when he first appeared. Now he can, but he still has to work really hard to do that, and even then he can only fly for short distances typically. Other than that, Beak simply can see better than most at a long range, and is armed with talons and a beak which he can of course use to fight with. But for the most part, Beak simply looks like a bird and as such is usually more on the sidelines than in the middle of the action. He did for a while have a suit, however, that enhanced his abilities and also granted him additional strength and powers more useful for physical fighting. But for the most part, I feel like Beak's main strong suit is just making friends with everybody. That's kind of what he does. Despite Dupe's eccentric nature, his status as a mutant remains unconfirmed. What is Dupe? Well, his origin is shrouded in mystery, leaving room for speculation that he could be a mutant, or he could be an alien, or he could be a being from another dimension. We don't really know. The lack of explicit verification makes him a peculiar addition, of course, to this list, although he clearly isn't the only non-mutant to join the X-Men team, as I've already talked about. I mean, like Candy's just a human. Though he might just be one of the quirkiest additions, mutant or not. Dupe has engaged in numerous adventures with the X-Men, serving as the receptionist for the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning, working for Wolverine. His presence on Krakoa did suggest that despite the unknown origin in terms of what we know factually in the comics, he really is at home among mutants, emphasizing his enigmatic connection to the mutant world, and possibly suggesting that he is a mutant, but like I said, we don't really know. While Fabio Medina today might be more easily recognized, considering that he's been a part of the very important mutant team known as the Five, which were responsible for resurrecting fallen mutants, when he was known by his former codename of Gold Balls, he would have been much less recognizable. Much less. Fabio's powers allow him to produce and shoot, well, gold balls from his body, hence his name, gold balls, each one firing off with a poink sound. However, since his time as gold balls, it was more recently revealed during the dawn of X that the balls that he produced were in actuality unfertile eggs. With this revelation, he took up the name Egg and he became one of the five, one of the most important mutants on the island nation of Krakoa, as with this newly understood power, he could basically create eggs, which could then be made fertile by the other five and could be used to regrow and resurrect fallen mutants, so pretty important. So if you haven't heard of Egg or Gold Balls, he is a member you'll likely get to know a bit better, I would say, in the modern era. I don't know if he's going to be as relevant in the new era of X-Men comics, but we'll have to wait and see. Amanda Sefton, initially known as Jermaine Zardos, is the adopted sister of Nightcrawler, a mutant and member of the X-Men who adds a layer of unexpected complexity to her relationship with Kurt, as also she is one of his significant love interests. Yeah, that's a thing, you heard me right. The complexity begins when, while adopting the alias Amanda, she ends up investigating Kurt's actions following their brother Steven's death, which was blamed on Kurt. Now, Jermaine assumes the persona of Amanda Sefton during this undercover operation. She's basically trying to figure out what really happened, and she doesn't think that Kurt is fully to blame here. And it's during this period that Kurt ends up developing feelings for her, oblivious, at least initially it seems, to the fact that Amanda is, yes, his adopted sister Jermaine. I don't know how you wouldn't recognize, but I digress. Maybe there's magic involved. Known more commonly as Amanda now in the comics, Jermaine is a formidable sorceress. While not a mutant, she has proven to be a valuable ally to the X-Men, and she was a member of their unofficial Muir Island X-Men team. Mimic is a mutant, but one who gained his abilities after knocking over a beaker accidentally in his father's lab, which caused a chemical reaction that created a strange red gas which he inhaled. His powers allow him to mimic the abilities and skills of other beings within a certain distance of him. Increased exposure to others' abilities seems to also grant him more permanent adaptations of those powers. It wasn't until more recently that it was confirmed that Mimic was in fact a mutant during House of X, as suspected since the 90s. We thought that was a thing, but you know, his origin is kinda weird. Instead, we were led to believe initially that he was a human whose DNA was genetically altered. Cause you know, his origins. While not appearing often in the comics, Mimic, aka Calvin Rankin, is a character who has been around since the 1960s and first appeared in X-Men issue number 19, where fans were introduced to him and the question was posed of whether or not Mimic was a mutant or something far worse. Turns out he was a mutant, not something far worse. Mimic is a longtime villain of the X-Men who did for a time play the role of hero and has served on both the heroic X-Men team as well as Norman Osborn's Dark X-Men team during the events of Dark Reign. Despite the fact that Forget-Me-Not is someone you definitely forget, you may have heard us talk about him before on this channel. But for those who have not heard of him or have simply forgotten him, let me give you a little refresher in terms of who he is. Forget-Me-Not is an X-Men member whose mutant power is that no one can ever remember him, which is why, you know, might be a member of the team that we'd be like, wow, that's surprising, because I forgot about him. Get it? His powers make it easier for him to infiltrate places, but it also makes it harder for him to ever connect with anyone, make a friend, or even, you know, have his teammates remember that he is actually on that team because they don't remember who he is. This is why Forget-Me-Not is also usually left off the official rosters for the team, and while you might never really see his name mentioned there ever, sometimes he'll just pop up and you'll be like, oh, I guess he's on the team, but none of us remembered that. Forget-Me-Not's psychic powers that enable him to go unnoticed and remain forgotten were actually so strong that even Professor Xavier struggled to remember him, and as it was revealed in X-Men Legacy issue number 300, he actually had to place within his mind a psychic hourly reminder just so he wouldn't forget permanently about Forget-Me-Not's existence. Yeah. You know you're powerful when Professor X has to set a psychic timer.